The courtroom was silent. Lawyers and reporters sat still, waiting. Karoline Leavitt, sharp, confident, and unshaken, stood before the bench, her golden cross necklace resting just below her collarbone. She hadn't come looking for a fight, but the judge had other plans. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, his voice cold, "remove the cross, or I will fine you for contempt." A murmur spread through the courtroom. People glanced at one another, confused. A fine? For wearing a cross? Karoline's expression remained calm. She looked the judge directly in the eye. "With all due respect, Your Honor, that's unconstitutional." The judge's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected pushback, but what he didn't know was that Karoline wasn't just any defendant. She was a legal genius, and by the time this trial was over, it wouldn't be Karoline who walked away embarrassed. It would be the judge. The tension in the courtroom thickened. Eyes darted between Karoline Leavitt and the judge, as if waiting for someone to break the silence. The judge leaned forward, his irritation obvious. "Ms. Leavitt, religious symbols are not permitted in my courtroom. Remove it or face a fine." Karoline remained still. She had spent years studying the law, defending constitutional rights. She knew exactly what was happening. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "on what legal grounds are you demanding this?" The judge scoffed. "I don't owe you an explanation. This is my courtroom and my rules." A few lawyers in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Even they knew this wasn't legal. Then the judge dropped the hammer. "Either take it off, or you'll be fined $1,000 for contempt." A hush fell over the room. Karoline exhaled slowly. She had two choices: comply and let this injustice slide, or stand her ground and make history. She met the judge's glare and made her decision. "Then fine me, Your Honor," she said. "But first, let's talk about the Constitution." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Nobody spoke to a judge like that. The judge leaned back in his chair, clearly expecting Karoline to back down. "Ms. Leavitt, you're dangerously close to contempt." Karoline, unfazed, opened a folder she had brought with her. She pulled out a document and held it up. "Actually, Your Honor, I'd like to challenge that ruling." The judge frowned. "There is no challenge. This is my courtroom." Karoline flipped through case law with the precision of a seasoned attorney. "Your Honor, according to Supreme Court precedent, specifically Tinker vs. Des Moines, 1969, personal religious expression cannot be banned in a public setting without a compelling government interest." The judge's face stiffened. She continued, "Additionally, under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, religious symbols are protected even in government workplaces. You may control your courtroom, but you do not control my First Amendment rights." The room was dead silent. A lawyer in the back muttered, "She's right." The judge's confidence wavered. He had underestimated her. Karoline let the silence linger before adding, "If you still want to fine me, go ahead. Just know, I'll be appealing immediately, and I'm sure the media will find that quite interesting." The judge's jaw tightened. He had walked into a legal trap, one she had just snapped shut. The judge's fingers tightened around his gavel. His authority had never been questioned like this before, especially not by someone so young. "That's enough, Ms. Leavitt," he barked, his voice sharper now. But there was a hint of something else behind his words. Uncertainty. Karoline tilted her head slightly, watching him. She had seen this before. The moment when someone realized they had picked a fight with the wrong person. She flipped to another page in her file. "Your Honor, before you rule on my so-called contempt, you might also want to consider the precedent set in West Virginia versus Barnett, 1943, which explicitly states that the government cannot force someone to violate their religious expression in a public institution." The judge's face flushed red. A court official leaned in, whispering something to him. He glanced at Karoline, then at the packed courtroom. Reporters were already scribbling notes. He had a decision to make: stick to his ruling and face the very real possibility of being overturned, or back down and admit he had overstepped. His jaw clenched. He hated this. Finally, he took a slow breath and adjusted his robe. "Upon further review," he muttered, each word like acid on his tongue, "I am rescinding the fine." A wave of stunned murmurs filled the room. Karoline smiled slightly. She knew this was coming. because the law had been on her side all along. The tension in the room broke like a dam. Lawyers exchanged glances, reporters scribbled furiously, and the audience whispered in disbelief. The judge sat stiffly, clearly fuming, but he knew he had no choice. "This court is adjourned," he muttered, banging his gavel harder than necessary. Karoline gathered her papers slowly, taking in the moment. She hadn't just won. She had made a statement. As she turned to leave, a reporter called out, "Ms. Leavitt, do you have a comment on what just happened?" She paused, then said with a slight smile, "Yes. The Constitution still stands, and no judge, no matter how powerful, can erase it." The room erupted in applause. The judge quickly exited, his robe billowing behind him, desperate to escape the humiliation. Karoline walked out victorious, her cross still proudly displayed. She didn't just defend her rights that day. She reminded the world that when you know the law, when you refuse to back down, and when you stand for what's right, even the most powerful person in the room has to listen. Within hours, the story had spread like wildfire. Headlines dominated news outlets and social media exploded. Judge fines woman for wearing a cross, instantly regrets it. Karoline Leavitt exposes anti-religious bias in court, legal genius at work. Clips of the exchange circulated online, showing the exact moment the judge realized he had lost control. People from all walks of life praised Karoline for standing firm. One legal analyst on national television put it bluntly, "This judge made a fatal mistake. He underestimated a woman who knows the Constitution better than he does." Meanwhile, the backlash against the judge was swift. A formal complaint was filed against him, and the state's legal board announced a full review of his conduct. Suddenly, he wasn't the one passing judgment. He was the one being judged. Karoline, on the other hand, remained unshaken. She took to social media with a simple but powerful message: know your rights. Never let anyone intimidate you out of them. The post went viral, racking up millions of likes and shares. But for Karoline, it was never about fame. It was about proving that the law still protects those who stand for what they believe in. This wasn't just about one courtroom battle. It was about something bigger. In today's world, people are often pressured to stay silent, to compromise, to back down, especially when it comes to faith, freedom, and personal beliefs. But Karoline Leavitt proved something powerful that day. You don't have to. She didn't argue with emotions. She fought with knowledge. She knew her rights, knew the law, and when the moment came, she was prepared. And that's the real lesson. How many times do people accept injustice simply because they don't know they can fight back? How many give in when they could win? The truth is, courage alone isn't enough. You need to be armed with the facts. Because when you are, even the most powerful figures can't intimidate you. The real question is, what would you have done? Would you have taken off the cross? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you, like Karoline, have looked that judge in the eye and said, "That's unconstitutional," and proved it? Because at the end of the day, the law isn't just for those in power, it's for those brave enough to use it.